By the time I was 17, I'd spent more summer nights at the drive-in than anywhere else. I always stayed through the credits. I liked watching the place empty before making the walk home. That night, if I had left when I normally did, I never would have seen it. There was only one drive-in left in the state. It sat just outside town where the pavement gave way to the gravel and the trees opened into a wide field. Every Memorial Day weekend, the gates opened for the summer. Every Labor Day, they closed again until the following year. For those few months, it felt like half the state found its way there. I walked. The trip only took about 20 minutes if I cut through all the old ball fields and followed the tree line until it met the access road. By the time I reached the entrance, the screen was already towering above everything else, bright enough to see through the trees long before I stepped into the open. I never cared much what was playing. Some movies drew crowds, some barely filled half the field. I almost always ended up in the same spot anyways. It didn't matter. I came for the place. People who had never been to a drive-in always imagined it was about the movie. It wasn't. It was kids throwing footballs before sunset while their parents unfolded lawn chairs. It was the smell of popcorn drifting across the field every time the concession stand door opened. It was little kids falling asleep halfway through the movie while someone quietly carried them back to a blanket. By the time the previews ended, everyone settled in. For the next couple of hours, the only light came from the screen. There was something about sitting outside with a few hundred strangers that never felt really crowded. It felt shared, like everyone had agreed to disappear into the same story for a little while. I've forgotten almost everything about the movie they showed that night. I couldn't tell you what it was about now. I remember laughing once. I remember finishing my popcorn before a halfway point. Mostly, I remember the credits. People never stayed for them. The moment the first name started rolling, chairs folded shut all across the field. Conversations picked back up, cars' doors slammed, engines started. One by one, headlights drifted toward the exit until they disappeared beyond the trees. That part had become my favorite. Not because I wanted everyone to leave, I just liked watching a place slowly become quiet again. So I waited, like I always did. I sat there until the last of the taillights disappeared. Then I stood, stretched, and started to walk toward the exit. Halfway there, I stopped. It wasn't the sound that stopped me. It was the absence of one. I looked around. The field was empty. Not almost empty, but empty. No voices, no engines, no footsteps. The concession stand was dark. The ticket booth sat vacant near the entrance. Even the breeze seemed quieter than it had a moment earlier. I stood there a few seconds trying to figure out why it suddenly felt so different. And then, at first, I just stood there. The click hadn't been loud, but in a place that quiet it was impossible to ignore. I waited for another sound, telling myself it had probably come from one of the employees closing up for the night. Nothing. I took another step toward the exit. Then a low mechanical hum rolled across the empty field. I turned. High above the back of the lot, the projector had come to life. A beam of light stretched over the empty rows of parking spaces and struck the giant screen. I stood there a few seconds, trying to make sense of it. The movie had ended. Everyone had gone home. Why would they start another one now? My eyes drifted toward the projection booth. From where I stood, I usually couldn't make out much more than the window, but every now and then I'd catch someone moving behind the glass during a movie. That night, the window never changed. I waited for someone to step into view. Nobody did. The projector continued to run. The screen brightened. Instead of previews or advertisements, a picture appeared. There was no studio logo, no opening credits. No music, no dialogue. The film was completely silent. At first, I thought it might be somebody's home movie. The image wasn't polished enough to look like something playing in a theater, but it wasn't shaky either. The camera moved with a slow, steady rhythm, rising and falling just enough to suggest whoever was holding it was walking. A narrow road stretched ahead beneath a canopy of tall trees. Nothing else. No cars, no houses, no people. I listened without thinking, expecting footsteps, wind, anything. There was nothing. For a moment I wondered if the drive-in sound system had already been shut down for the night. That seemed more believable than a silent movie playing by itself after everyone had left. I kept watching, waiting for something to happen. A title, or a voice, someone to step into the frame. None of it came. The road curved gently through the trees, and the camera followed without ever slowing. Sunlight filtered through the branches overhead, but not a single leaf could be heard moving. That was the part I couldn't shake. It wasn't just silent. It felt as though sound had never existed there. I looked back at the projection booth one more time. Still no movement. When I turned back to the screen, the camera was still walking. Always forward. Never faster, never slower. I checked the sky without really knowing why. It had grown darker since the credits ended. I should have been halfway home by then. Instead, I stood in an empty drive-in watching a stranger walk down a road that seemed to have no destination. I kept waiting for something to change, for a person to come into frame, for the camera to turn. None of it happened. Without ever making a conscious decision, I stayed exactly where I was and watched. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was scared. I just couldn't stop thinking about it. The walk home felt longer than it usually did. Every few minutes I'd find myself replaying the same questions. Who started the projector? Why was nobody in the booth? What was I watching? By the time I climbed into bed, I'd settled on the explanation that made the most sense. Somebody had forgotten to shut it off. Maybe they were testing something after everyone left. Maybe the sound had already been disconnected for the night. Or maybe whoever started the projector had stepped away before I looked up. None of those explanations felt completely right, but they felt better than having none at all. By morning, I'd almost convinced myself. The week moved the way summer weeks always did. I mowed the lawn because my father asked me to. I met a couple of friends at the basketball courts one afternoon. The weather stayed hot enough that even after sunset, the air still felt heavy. No matter what I was doing, my thoughts always drifted back to the film. I'd catch myself wondering what was around the next bend, even though nothing had happened on it. There was no people, no houses. Just the feeling that it was leading somewhere. I'd spent longer watching that empty road than I care to admit. The stranger holding the camera had never stopped, never looked around, never turned back. I caught myself wondering if the camera ever stopped walking. Then I'd shake it off and think about something else. By Thursday, it seemed ridiculous. By Friday, I barely thought about it at all. Saturday came. Right around sunset, I found myself cutting across the old ball fields again. The walk felt exactly the same. The trees, the gravel road, the first glimpse of the screens of the branches. Nothing had changed. I almost laughed at myself for spending an entire week thinking about one strange night. Maybe I had really stumbled onto somebody testing equipment after closing. Maybe there was a perfectly ordinary explanation, and I'd feel stupid the moment I found it. I bought my popcorn, found my usual spot, and watched the movie. I couldn't have told you much about it afterward. My mind kept drifting toward the credits. When they finally began, people packed up exactly as they always had. Blankets disappeared, car doors slammed, headlights drifted toward the exit. I stayed where I was. Not because I was enjoying the quiet this time, because I was waiting. I told myself I'd give it 1 minute after the last car left. If nothing happened, I'd go home. The field emptied, the concession stand went dark. Silence settled over the rows of parking spaces. I looked toward the projection booth. Nothing. I let out a slow breath. Maybe that was it. Maybe last week really had been nothing more than the strange timing. I turned toward the exit. I closed my eyes for a second. Not because the sound startled me, because I already knew what I was going to see. The projector hummed to life. The beam stretched across the empty field. I turned toward the screen. The camera had already left the road behind. Now it moved beneath the trees, exactly where it had been headed when I left the week before. It hadn't started over. It had continued. I didn't realize I'd taken a step toward the screen until I was already moving. And then another. I stopped. The film rolled on in complete silence. Still no music, still no voices, still no sign of whatever was holding the camera. For the second Saturday in a row, I stayed. The third week was the hardest, not because anything had happened, because I couldn't stop thinking about Saturday. I'd never counted the days until the weekend before. Now I caught myself doing it without realizing. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Each morning I told myself I wasn't going back just for the film. By that afternoon, I knew I was lying. The week moved the way summer weeks always did. Mowed the lawn, cleaned out the garage, met a couple of friends for burgers after they spent the afternoon at the lake. But mostly, my thoughts drifted back toward the film. When Saturday finally came, I left the house a little earlier than usual. Not because I wanted a better spot, but because I wanted the evening to get there faster. The walk felt exactly the same. Across the old ball fields, along the tree line, past the faded sign pointing toward the drive-in. Everything looked exactly the way it always had. I was the one who had changed. I wasn't thinking about the movie they were showing that night. I couldn't have told you its name if someone had asked. For the first time since I'd started coming there, the feature presentation felt like something I had to sit through before the thing I actually wanted to see. That thought made me feel guilty, as if I'd stopped appreciating the place for what it was. The movie ended, the credits rolled, people packed up, I stayed seated. This time I wasn't pretending there was another reason. I was waiting. One by one, the cars disappeared through the exit. The voices faded, the lot emptied. And then... I didn't even look toward the booth. I already knew it would be empty. The projector started, the beam reached the screen, the film returned. Not from the beginning, not from the road, not even from the woods where I'd left it the week before. It had kept going. The trees were closer together now. The light had changed. The path had narrowed until branches brushed past the edges of the frame. The camera never hesitated. It never looked left or right. It only continued forward. I watched for something, anything that might explain what I was seeing. A cabin, a trail marker. Instead, there were only trees. Different trees, different shadows. The kind of details you only notice because there was nothing else to notice. I started studying everything. The shape of a broken limb, the roots crossing the path, a patch of sunlight that lingered across the ground before disappearing before the canopy. I started wondering if I'd seen that tree before, if maybe the camera had circled back without me realizing it. But it hadn't. Every few minutes, something new appeared. Not important, just new. Enough to convince me the journey had a destination. The silence made it harder to judge time. Without dialogue or music, without even footsteps, there was nothing to measure the minutes against. The film could have been running for 10 minutes. It could have been running for 40. I had no idea. And then, for the first time, the path changed. It dipped downhill, only slightly, but enough that I noticed. I leaned forward without meaning to. The camera followed the slope. At the bottom, the trees began to thin. Not by much, just enough that I thought I could see more open ground ahead. I waited. The opening grew larger with every step. Whatever was beyond the trees, I was finally going to see it. The image disappeared. The projector shut off. The screen went white. Silence. I stared at the blank screen for another minute before I finally stood. The walk home felt different. For the first time, I was disappointed the movie had ended. By the fourth Saturday, I had stopped pretending it was a coincidence. I still couldn't explain it. I had simply accepted that once the last car left the drive-in and the field became quiet, the projector would start. It was as certain to me as the credits. That week passed a little slower. I spent time with friends, went to the lake, laughed when I was supposed to laugh, listened when people talked, and answered every question everyone asked me. But no matter what I was doing, my thoughts always drifted back to the film. I'd catch myself wondering how much farther I had gone, what the camera might reach next, whether after all of this something would finally happen. I considered telling someone once, not because I wanted help, mostly because I wanted to hear it out loud. I never did. The story sounded believable inside my own head. I wasn't so sure it would once it reached someone else's ears, so I kept it to myself. Saturday finally came. By then, I'd stopped paying much attention to whatever movie was playing. I still watched it, but part of me knew I was only waiting for the field to empty. And when it finally did, the projector hummed, the beam crossed the lot, and the film returned exactly where it had ended the week before. The trees slowly opened into the clearing I'd almost seen the previous Saturday. It wasn't large, just a patch of open ground where sunlight poured through the branches. The path crossed it without slowing. Beside it stood a weathered wooden post of what looked like the remains of an old sign. Most of it had rotted away years earlier. The camera walked past before I had more than a second to look at it. For just an instant, I thought I could make out a single word. Then it was gone. The trail disappeared beneath the trees again. The camera kept moving. The silence never changed. I watched, waiting for anything else to appear, anything at all, but nothing ever did. The camera continued at the same steady pace, as though whoever was holding it had somewhere to be. I searched every corner of the screen now. Not because I expected something to jump out, because I was afraid I'd miss something. Another sign, a building, anything that proved the journey was leading somewhere. Before long, the screen went white. The projector shut down. The drive-in was quiet again. I stayed in my chair for another minute, staring at the blank screen. This time, I wasn't just thinking about what I'd watched. I was thinking about what I might have missed. At that point, Saturday nights had become predictable. Not because I knew what I was going to see, because I knew exactly when it would begin. The movie ended, the credits rolled, people folded their chairs, cars drifted toward the exit. The lot emptied. I waited. The projector started. The film returned. The woods were now gone. The camera crossed an open field beneath the fading sky. Something stood in the distance. At first, it was only a shape. Dark, square, and still. Then the outline sharpened. A giant movie screen. I stopped breathing for a second. The camera slowed. The field gave way to gravel. Rows of weathered speaker posts appeared one after another. The concession stand came into view. I recognized it immediately. Not because it looked familiar, because I was standing there. The camera continued through the empty drive-in exactly as it had left behind. No cars, no people. Nothing moved. The place looked less like a theater now, more like a photograph. The camera passed the row of speakers posts without hesitating. It never looked toward the screen. It never looked toward the lot. It already knew where it was going. Ahead, the projection booth waited in silence. The camera climbed the wooden stairs, crossed the landing, passed through an open doorway. For the first time, I wasn't watching the drive-in anymore. I was watching the place where I'd been watching from all along. Inside, the projector filled most of the room. Its reels turned steadily. Its light spilled through the projection window. The camera moved closer, closer, until the projector filled the frame. Then, it drifted past it. Beyond the glass, I could see the screen. A narrow road stretched beneath the canopy of trees. I stared at it. I'd seen that road before. Not one like it, but that one. It was the first thing the projector had ever shown me. The first Saturday. The beginning. I looked from the screen to the projector and back again. The road hadn't led here. It had always been here. The film had never been going somewhere. It had only been finding its way back to where it began. I never looked away. I don't remember how long I stood there after the projector shut off. Long enough for the screen to fade back to white. Long enough for the silence to return. When I finally started home, I couldn't stop thinking about the next Saturday. Because I already knew how the movie ended. And somehow, that only made me want to see it again.